I get panic attacks. I think I've talked about this, but not actually very much online because it's something that has taken me a few years to cope with and to figure out that it was even a thing. I honestly didn't know that I got panic attacks for a long time. So I started noticing my panic attacks after I got PANDAS Disorder, which I've talked about on here in the past, and I do want to do an updated episode on that at some point. But I had so many aftermath effects, things that I was working through, that the panic attacks just seemed like something to do with that. And I never really realized that it was actually panic attacks. I thought it was PTSD, which I think it was borderline PTSD at one point. And then they evolved and started to just become a part of my regular life, which is unfortunate, but I have them. And I don't want to hide that, especially since I talk about mental health so much on here. I always thought that my panic attacks stemmed from anxiety, and in a way, they can. But ultimately, there's a big difference between anxiety attacks and panic attacks, where anxiety attacks tend to stem from something that is making you anxious, general anxiety, which is, they can be really severe. They can last for months. It can be really, really severe. Panic attacks tend to come very acutely. They tend to come up very randomly. They might be triggered by something, but they are very intense and at most would maybe last an hour. It's possible they last a little bit more, but they're short, but they're intense. And you can't always tell that they're coming. So I've had both in my lifetime. I got a lot of anxiety attacks after PANDAS, during PANDAS, and I assumed that these panic attacks were the same thing until I realized that they had continued to happen after I had done intense counseling, intense rewiring of my brain to kind of move on after PANDAS Disorder and allow my brain to see that there is a life after that. And the panic attacks stayed. They've gotten a lot better, but they are something that I live with at this point. And maybe someday I won't, but right now that's just part of my reality. So I didn't ever realize they were panic attacks until I one day understood the difference between panic attacks and anxiety attacks. People who don't have an ounce of generalized anxiety or just any anxiety can still get panic attacks, and they come on super randomly, and sometimes they are so intense that skills that you have with anxiety can be harder to use, or sometimes they can just be so intense that you need a little bit of help. So let's see, when was that? About almost 2 years ago now, I got on medication for the panic attacks because I finally realized what they were. I was struggling with my PMDD, which was also not under control, and I would get a lot of panic attacks because of it. And I thought it had something to do with that. I thought it had something to do with generalized anxiety. I thought it had something to do with, I don't know, I felt very confused because I was doing everything that I could. I was using all of my skills, and nothing that I would do would make them go away. And that's not what the skills are meant for, right? But the skills are meant to decrease the level of intensity of these attacks, and they never did. And sometimes the attacks would just get worse. And that's when I realized that it was probably because they were medical panic attacks and they were so intense that I needed a little bit of help. So I got on medication for them to use as needed. And that was the first moment that I realized that they were not a life sentence. I thought that my panic attacks were a life sentence. I thought that I was going to have them forever, and I tend to get them more when I have some sort of transition going on. If my body is getting used to something, it responds by I don't want to say overreacting, but overreacting. And I will get physical symptoms and, have difficulty breathing, have difficulty doing things like that. So I thought that I just couldn't do anything. I thought that my life had to stay exactly how it was, and I couldn't change anything, because if I changed something, I would get these panic attacks. And they were so intense to the point that I really didn't feel safe with them. And when I got on the medication, I realized that it was possible to get through it. My medication helps me bring down the intensity of the attack enough that I can use my skills and that they actually help me, and I can bring it down the severity of the panic attack even more after that. I did not know that was something that was possible. I truly did not think that I would ever be able to have a life where if I got a panic attack, I could think to myself, okay, this has happened before. I know what to do. I have this toolkit in my pocket, and I know it'll be gone within likely 30 minutes to an hour. I would miss classes. I had to take time off of school because of it. It really was messing with my ability to function a regular life. When I started college, I wanted to be a neuroscience major, but I didn't do it because the amount of work that I had to do and the just level of being able to function, I wasn't there. I didn't think I would be capable of that, because there were days that I had trouble even going to class because of panic attacks. So I ended up switching my major, or just not declaring a neuroscience major, and was trying to figure out what was it that I wanted to do, because I didn't think I would be able to do this. After I got on my medication and I started to realize what panic attacks actually are, within about 2 months of getting on my medication, I had declared a neuroscience and an economics major, and I was sure that I could do it. And I am now almost a senior in college, and I am still working on those majors, and I'm so glad that I switched it. The point of this being, panic attacks can really change your life. And it's important, I think, at least for me, when I was getting them, and I still do, but when I was getting them and I thought that they were due to my anxiety, I really was hard on myself in a way that I shouldn't have been. Now, anxiety attacks, again, it is not something that you can necessarily, it's not something that you are causing to happen. It's not something that you're choosing, right? But somehow realizing that these panic attacks were so intense because the intensity was so big that my skills didn't work, realizing that they were medical and they were maybe happening for reasons that have nothing to do with my actual anxiety completely changed it for me, because I was really hard on myself for getting them, because I would get them and I wouldn't understand why. I would wake up in the morning because I was having a panic attack in the middle of the night. I would wake up in the middle of a panic attack. I would just be walking, doing my everyday stuff, and get a panic attack in public. These things would happen, and I had no way of knowing that it was starting, that it was coming on, because they were so sudden, and I didn't know, I didn't have the skills, I didn't understand why it was happening. And that was so frustrating to me, because I was doing everything that I can. I had done years and years of therapy. I had been trying to reverse everything that came from having PANDAS disorder. And this one thing was so intense that it felt like it was setting me 20 steps back, right? And I didn't understand why. And I wanted to be able to have the skills to move forward and live my life despite it, and learn how to work with it, but I couldn't understand why it was happening. And so once we realized that these were panic attacks that may not even happen for any particular reason, it's just that my body for some reason gets overstimulated and responds that way, learning that really changed my mindset on it. I still get them. I, in a way, do believe it could be possible that I will get them for the rest of my life. I do think that I have recovered so much more than I ever thought was possible from PANDAS disorder. And I do believe at this point that the PMDD that I have, which I have talked about before on here as well, and the panic disorder came from that. It might be some aftermath effects, and it might be something that my brain will never truly be able to recover from 100%, but I've never cried on a podcast episode before. Oh my God. But knowing that I have gotten so far that the things that I am struggling with today are things that I have been able to get under control. Like maybe the PANDAS disorder still has ways that it affects me afterward in life today. Maybe I still struggle with this in life today. Maybe I will always have panic attacks and PMDD after PANDAS because of PANDAS, but these are things that I have been able to get under control. I'm on medication for my PMDD, and I have, it's a non-issue at this point. Occasionally something might go wrong, occasionally, but in general, my PMDD is a non-issue at this point in my life. And my panic attacks, I have the skills, I have the medication, I have the support that I need. And it took me, honestly, oh my goodness, how many years was that? I think I got on the medication and I finally started to understand them in I think it took about 4 or 5 years to finally get the help that I needed for my panic attacks. And that was like a game changer for me. It just felt like that one piece of the puzzle that I was still missing, that I didn't quite understand why they happened or what to do about it. And I want to take a moment to recognize that taking medication for any mental health disorder, any physical health disorder either, is incredibly important and okay. One of the reasons why it took me so long to get on the medication for this panic disorder was because there were 2 people in my life that really made me feel guilty for using it. I had, in a past relationship, I had some mindset, some beliefs, I was told many times that taking medication was weak. And so I just chose not to get on it. I did not want to be on it. I did not want to think that I was weak. And so instead I chose to deal with it. And it got a lot worse. I do think that it got a lot worse and they became a lot more frequent and a lot more intense because of it. And recovering from that definitely took longer because I didn't give myself the help that I needed at the time. And I also had a medical professional at one point tell me that taking medication was running away from my problems, which was intense and not professional. But despite that, I moved on and I was able to create a mindset around it that I understand. I don't use it as a way to run away, right? I don't use it as a way to not use my skills. I use it as a way to teach my brain that there is hope. When I would get a panic attack in the past, I thought that it would last forever. my mind would go to dark places. I would immediately think that I was going to get these panic attacks my whole life. I was going to get them, anytime anything changes, anything minor. I mean, I couldn't even see a reality where it wasn't, like, where it was worth it. And they were so intense that using those skills, they didn't work, but then they also got harder and harder to use as the panic attacks kept coming and coming, because I just started giving up hope. And using your brain, it falls into patterns. Your brain loves patterns. It likes having a routine. And so when anything minorly inconvenient happened in my life, or even if nothing did happen, my brain would respond by a panic attack. My body would respond by a panic attack. And they would happen so frequently, and I didn't have the skills that I needed to work with them. And today, they don't happen very often anymore, because my brain has learned that there are ways to respond without it. But I had to use that medication in order to show it that there is, like, you can have a panic attack and still survive through it. I hadn't really, I would end up getting away. When I would have a panic attack, my response would usually be I would end up just crying myself to sleep. And my brain didn't know that there was a way to do it without going to dark places first. And when I started taking the medication, it works quite fast. And I realized that it is possible for my skills to work and for me to have a panic attack and feel better within a few minutes, or for me to have a panic attack and still be able to continue the rest of my day despite it. I did not know that was possible. My brain did not know that was possible. And so the more and more I had panic attacks and used this medication to basically retrain it and bring it down from having that panic attack and make the panic attack shorter, the more my brain realized, wait, there are other ways to respond to whatever was causing this to happen, right? Instead of responding by this high, response, this overreaction in my body, the situation didn't change. Whatever it was that may have triggered my panic attack or didn't trigger my panic attack, right? My body was still acting the way that it was, but this medication was helping it calm down in a way that it found other ways to cope with that, even if it was as simple as something like thinking logically through something. And when I started to learn that, when my body started to learn that there are other ways to respond to it, the panic attacks happen less frequently. And now I have gone through multiple transitions in my life and not had them. And honestly, the only major transition where I have had them was moving across the world. I had panic attacks. They lasted about 72 hours. Not the panic attack itself, but I was getting them consistently, about hour after hour, for about 72 hours, and then they were gone. And it went away. And I learned how to do it, right? I didn't have to go home. I wouldn't have been able to do that a year ago. That would not have been physically possible for me. And I think it's so important to be able to talk about this, because it's something that I think on two ends, well, multiple ends is important, but on two ends for me, and why I'm talking about it, because I know that this is what I would have had to hear, is one, if you went through a severe situation that, may have scarred you in a way, may have permanently changed you in a way, like with me with PANDAS disorder, right? It's okay to not be okay. It's okay for there to be some things in your life that, it might stay that way. It could get better, right? I do believe, I know, well, for a fact, my panic attacks have gotten way better. My PMDD has gotten way better. And I do believe that there could be a day where maybe I don't get them anymore. It's very possible. It's also very possible that that might not happen. And I've learned to understand that that's okay, right? I went through this intense situation, this intense thing that really, I mean, quite literally, it put me in a state of psychosis. And I came through that. And if I have a few things here and there that are aftermath of this stressful, traumatic past thing that happened, I'm just glad that that thing isn't happening anymore. I'm just glad that I don't have PANDAS disorder anymore. And I'm amazed and so grateful that I have the resources to work through these things. I like to be perfect. I've talked about that before, but I will not be perfect. I cannot be perfect. I will never be perfect. And these are two ways that maybe I'm not what I would think of as perfect in my mind, but I'm as perfect as I need to be. And I think that's really important, because one of the reasons that it was so hard for me to be able to move forward was because I was just so hard on myself. I felt guilty. I felt like I should be able to, stop these things from happening. I thought, wait, I made it through PANDAS disorder. I did that. I should be able to do this too. That's not necessarily the case, right? Like, it's not that I can't it's not that I can't do it. It's that I need to learn how to accept it. Because if you accept the reality, you're a lot less hard on yourself. And when I started to accept and realize that this is the reality, so I need to learn how to work with it, that's when I started to realize that there were ways to still enjoy life despite the struggles that I have. And the second reason why I feel like this is important to talk about, because of what I know that I needed, was because I never really heard people talk about panic attacks very much. I guess I did, but not in a way like this before. Not in a way that, I think what I had in my mind of panic attacks was anxiety attacks. And those are real, and those are intense, and those are incredibly painful too, as someone who has experienced those as well. But I was looking at my panic attacks thinking that they were something else. And so I wasn't able to see them for what they were. And that caused me a lot of stress as well, because I felt very confused, because they didn't look like what I had seen before. And what I had seen before was anxiety attacks. And panic attacks are different. And I didn't know what they were. So I don't think I've ever really heard people talk about the difference before online. I'm sure people have. Of course they have. But I haven't heard that very much, especially with people talking about mental health online so often. It is very common for things to become very generic or definitions to get mixed up. And I didn't know that there was even a difference between them. And I still, to this day, will sometimes, if I have, if I'm talking about a past anxiety attack, because I don't really get anxiety attacks anymore. That's something that I think I used to get when I was younger, but I haven't really gotten them anymore. But if I do describe an anxiety attack, I catch myself saying a panic attack. And I have to remind myself, no, they are different. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with necessarily calling them a panic attack. But for me, I learned that I need to call them anxiety attacks. I need to know the difference of anxiety versus panic attack, because of the way that I confused myself with it before, and I put pressure in a way that, assuming that it was one thing, but it was actually something else, it messed with my brain. And I needed to separate the two in my head. And when my mom actually was the one to explain to me, she is a doctor, a nurse practitioner, and when she was the one to explain to me the difference between them, it was like this like aha moment, like just pure epiphany. I was like, this makes so much more sense to me. And I think that that is really important, to be able to understand your mental health and understand what is going on, because if you understand it, you are able to give yourself a lot more grace. And at least for me, I like to know the why behind everything, and not everything has a why, right? But it somehow helps me process through it better and understand it better. So between those two things, I really wanted to talk about that today. And I also want, to be honest, I talk about how I've gotten through PANDAS disorder so much online, and I don't talk about it as much, honestly, and I'd like to do an episode about it again, but I talk about getting through things so often, but I don't talk about the stuff that I do still struggle with as often. And I think that's important to be able to talk about that too. I do have lasting effects from PANDAS disorder. I, at one point in my life a few years ago, thought that I didn't. I thought that it was all gone, it was all away, and that I had, generalized anxiety, and I thought that that was genetic. Turns out I don't have generalized anxiety, actually. I will occasionally have situational anxiety. I don't really have depression either. I had all of these diagnoses that turns out I don't actually have. They were, my entire medical history after PANDAS has been a lot of false diagnoses, a lot of unknowns, a lot of confusion, and it's taken a whole team to help me figure this out. If I could count the amount of doctors that it took, like I can think of just off the top of my hand at least 15 to 20 doctors that it has taken to be able to figure out this place where I am at right now, like just to get me to where I am right now. It's not easy. It takes teamwork. It takes figuring it out, but that's the reality, right? I may struggle with these things my entire life, and I don't even think that I don't know if I would say that I will struggle with them my whole life, but I may have them my whole life, but they aren't the same type of struggle that they used to be, and I don't believe that they will continue to be how they look today. I think that they will continue to improve. And after that, it's just a matter of waiting and seeing. So this is my raw, honest, where I'm at episode here. I've been wanting to record this for a while and just give an update on all of my medical life and everything going on with that. So I finally sat down to record it. I will see you next week. The last 2 episodes I had pre-recorded. I think I did that around March-ish. And so I'm going to start now posting every other week instead while I am still abroad. And then when I get back, we will see, but I'll most likely go back to posting once a week for episodes. I'll see you in 2 weeks.